Today we're continuing the Master Machine Hunting series with Tremortusks. Now I actually did a video on how to kill the first Tremortusk from the Broken Sky quest a while ago, but fighting that particular Tremortusk is pretty different from taking down a wild one. I've also spent way more time in the game now and hunted lots of Tremortusks, including lots of Apex variants, so I've refined my strategy and also have a good method for getting all the tusks as we take them down. Now yes, of course you can turn on the easy loot setting or lower your difficulty to story mode to make sure you get the tusks, but if you're anything like me, then you're looking for an effective way to take down Tremortusks on the difficulty level you like to play on. So that's exactly what I'm going to show you. We're going to cover both normal and Apex Tremortusks, and with both variants I'll show you how to take them down fast and make sure you get those tusks. So Tremortusks are of course a new machine in Forbidden West, and they can be quite challenging, especially on higher difficulty levels like Very Hard, which is what I'll be playing on for this video. Taking down a Tremortusk can be complicated by the fact that we need their tusks for gear upgrades, and you actually need a lot of tusks to upgrade purple and gold items. For example, the Deathseeker Hunter Bow, Blastforge Bolt Blaster, and Nora Thunder Warrior outfit each require 10 tusks for their level 3 upgrades. And basically all the legendary items require some type of Tremortusk component, like circulators or an Apex Heart. So if you're in the endgame and you're looking to upgrade your gear, then you'll be fighting quite a few Tremortusks, and you're going to want an efficient strategy that gets you those tusks while also taking them down quickly. To show you how effective my strategy is, I'll be playing on Very Hard and using only blue rarity gear. Now the obvious approach with a normal Tremortusk is to exploit its weakness to frost. Freezing it gives us a big damage multiplier, allowing us to take it down quickly. For example, you could freeze one and then use the Sustained Burst weapon technique with a Bolt Blaster to knock its health down really fast. The problem is this doesn't really help us get the tusks. In fact, it's pretty easy to get carried away killing it and forget about tearing the tusks off altogether. So we need to prioritize detaching those tusks and then finish the Tremortusk off afterwards. The problem is the tusks are pretty difficult to hit with arrows, especially since they're almost constantly moving around. You could tie down the Tremortusk with a rope caster, but even then it still moves its tusks around quite a bit. Plus, as soon as you deal any significant amount of damage, the binding state will be removed, so your ropes aren't useful for very long. The ideal approach would be to shock the Tremortusk, which completely immobilizes it, but we can see by scanning one that it's highly resistant to shock. Side note, as of patch 1.13, when you look at the Tremortusk notebook entry, it's actually missing the shock resistance stat, but don't be fooled by that, they're definitely resistant to shock. However, despite their shock resistance, there's a pretty cool trick we can use to shock Tremortusks anyway. Looking in the notebook again, we can see that they do actually have sparker canisters, but it's very easy to overlook these because it's hard to tell where exactly the canisters are on the Tremortusk's body. These canisters are actually recessed under protective plates on the front legs. You can see the plate here with a yellow triangle on it. The canister is directly underneath, and if we can remove the plate, the canister will pop out, giving us a way to shock the Tremortusk. To do that, you're going to want to deal tear damage to the plate, with either tear precision arrows on a sharpshot bow or advanced hunter arrows on a hunter bow. I'll be using tear precision arrows on the blue cleaving sharpshot bow, which you get at the start of the Broken Sky quest, but later on you should use advanced hunter arrows on something like the Deathseeker for better resource efficiency. Once the plate is removed, we just need to hit the canister with a shock arrow to cause a shock explosion. Unfortunately, there are only 2 shock hunter bows in Forbidden West, and both are high level and challenging to get. One is the Lightning Hunter Bow, obtained by completing the Need to Know side quest with Talana, and the other is the Deathseeker's Shadow, which is purchased with arena medals. Now if you have one of those, you should totally use it to hit the sparker canister, but if you don't have one of those bows yet, then I have a couple other options for you. I think the next best option would be the Shock Bolt Blaster, available in Scalding Spear. You can simply shoot a burst or 2 of shock bolts at the canister to trigger the explosion. This is actually a pretty nice method because you don't have to be super accurate with the bolts. I'll be using the Shock Bolt Blaster for the demo in a minute. The other option would be the Green Shock Warrior Bow that you can get for free from the Daunt Hunting Grounds. You don't even have to do any trials to get it. Just talk with Thurles and the Hunting Grounds Keeper and they'll give it to you for free. This is definitely not an ideal shock weapon, but it is free and it'll get the job done. I'd recommend using it with the Burst Fire weapon technique to shoot 3 arrows at once in a fairly tight spread if you're having trouble hitting the canister. Okay, so now that we've shocked the Tremortusk, we have 15 seconds to tear off its tusks. You could use more tear precision arrows to do this, but that's a little overkill in terms of resource efficiency for me, so I prefer to use advanced hunter arrows. Remember, overdrawing increases tear damage too, so it's best to notch 3 arrows before each shot so you can overdraw all of them at once. Another tip is to equip your bow with some coils that boost tear damage. Tear damage coils available in Arrowhand are an obvious choice. A slightly better option would be component tear coils. 15% blue versions of these are for sale in Hidden Ember, but you can find purple 25% versions from Hunting Machines. Another option is agility damage coils, sold at the Bulwark and in Hidden Ember. These boost impact and tear damage when jumping or sliding, so it's easy to give yourself a tear damage boost anytime you want. I'll be using a mix of these coils on the Sun-Touched Hunter Bow for the live demo. So while the Tremortusk is shocked for 15 seconds, you should be able to tear off at least 2 tusks, but getting all 4 can be tough. I suggest as soon as you get 2 off, you immediately focus focus on the second shock canister plate to get ready to shock it again. When the Tremortusk goes down the first time, I like to start by tearing off one of the big middle tusks and then work my way over to the smaller tusk on the side that still has a canister. This way, you'll be well positioned to get that second plate off. However, keep in mind that the salvo cannons will fire as soon as the Tremortusk starts to get up, so you'll need to do a quick dodge before you can target the second canister plate. Once you get that plate off, it should be pretty easy to shock the Tremortusk again and get the remaining 2 tusks off. Now at this point, we have the tusks, but we still need to deal a bunch of damage to take the Tremortusk down. I suggest you target the ammo drums on its rear next. These contain some pretty useful resources, like machine muscle and metal bones, so it's a good idea to focus on them for the extra resources, plus a solid amount of damage when you tear them off. Shout out to Sunny over on Discord for pointing out the drums as a good resource farm. But before focusing on the drums, we'll want to get some distance from the Tremortusk and start freezing it to build up the brittle state, so our hits to the drums deal more damage. I'll be using the Frost Hunter bow with a few blue frost coils to freeze the Tremortusk, but this goes much faster with the Seeker or Sunscourge Hunter bows. Alternatively, you could use a blast sling like the Icefire or Rampart, or a bolt blaster like the Sky Strike or Ice Storm. However you choose to freeze the Tremortusk, the rest of the fight is mostly going to be alternating between freezing it and tearing off ammo drums. Now while you're doing this, you're going to have to avoid the Tremortusk's attacks. Mainly, it will either charge you or advance with swinging tusks. It will also fire off lots of rockets from its salvo cannons and may shoot plasma tracks at you. To dodge all of these, I recommend you get comfortable with the slide dodge, which is exactly what it sounds like. You'll want to first start running, slide by hitting square to crouch, and then throw in a dodge roll at the end of the slide by hitting circle. Remember to hit square again at the very end so you don't end up crouched. This combination maximizes both the ground you can cover and the invincibility frames you get. That being said, it still requires some good timing and practice to avoid the Tremortusk's attacks. For the charging attack, you should simply run at an angle to one side and slide dodge when it gets close. The swinging tusk attack is a bit more difficult to avoid, but the same tactic applies. You'll just need to time your dodge with the swinging tusks. The salvo cannon rockets can be quite annoying, but they're relatively easy to dodge once you get the timing down. Keep your eye on those cannons though, because they'll glow right before firing. And remember, when the Tremortusk fires single rockets, it can fire up to 5 in a row, so you'll need to keep running and dodging until the attack is done. With the plasma blast tracks, you can either dodge between them or dodge out to the sides. It's difficult to dodge these close to the Tremortusk, so that's another reason to keep your distance as much as possible. As with most machines, dodging the Tremortusk's attacks is one of the more challenging parts of the fight. Perhaps their most frustrating attack is the volley of shock cannon orbs that can track you. If you need to avoid this one, I find it's best to get behind the Tremortusk as fast as possible. You might also need to avoid the Tremortusk's shockwaves. For those, you should dodge straight through them to avoid getting shocked. Anyway, keep freezing and then rotating around to give yourself a good angle on those ammo drums, and by the time you get them all removed, the Tremortusk will be almost dead. To finish it off with a flare, launch a brace shot to explode the blaze sack on its belly. Okay, let's put all that together and dive into the live combat. Okay guys, so I'm here at the Tremortusk site that's in the mountains in the Sky Clan, and I'll show you my difficulty is on very hard and aim assist is on default. Also, I don't think I showed you before, so I'll show you my outfit's a fully upgraded Nora Sentinel with some basic blue melee defense weaves on it. So nothing crazy for the outfit. I'm going to preload 3 frost arrows, preload 3 advanced hunter arrows, so we have those ready to go. Also check to make sure I have my shock bolts loaded. I often forget to load the shock or the bolt blaster before I get into a fight, so that's good we have it loaded. I also like to highlight the drums and the tusks, since those are our main targets. And then we're just going to land a tear precision arrow on that plate. Doesn't have to be a perfect shot, can just be close. He's going to turn, which is nice on the first one. It makes it easy to hit the canister. And then I'm going to get ready to go for these front right tusks, the front 2 right tusks, my right, his left, because we shocked the canister on the other side, and I want to get ready to move over to this side. Triple notch, overdraw, and then I'm jumping because I have an agility coil on this bow, so I get a little bit of extra tear and impact damage for jumping or sliding. So I'm going to hit this other plate since we're well positioned for that. Get ready to shock it. There we go. Craft some more advanced hunter arrows, get ready to go for his other 2 tusks. As you guys can see, this going for these shock canisters really makes it very easy to get the tusks, which is nice. And we'll also have about half of his health down by the time we're done with this. So it's just a really nice opening strategy. 1 more, 2 more arrows on that to get it off. Okay, so we have all the tusks off. Actually, he did not launch any salvo cannons when he was getting up. Rockets when he was getting up. He's launching a few now though. I'm keeping an eye on it to make sure I see it glowing. Usually he will launch salvo cannons when he's getting up from being shocked, in my experience. So you want to keep an eye on that. We kind of lucked out there a little bit. But now we're basically just keeping our distance. Launching off frost arrows to freeze him. I do try and focus on components with the frost arrows just to deal a little bit of extra damage if I can. And then I'm rotating around here to get a view of the drums. So we're going to try and get all 4 of these off. Again, keeping an eye on those salvo cannons. Don't have a good view of the drums, but I'm just going to hit him in the face a little bit. Craft some more frost arrows. He's unfrozen, so we're going to go back to freezing him. We've got more than half of his health gone already. So you can imagine by the time we get all the drums off, he'll be almost dead. Which is great. Okay, this is a good example of the tusk swinging, which is much harder to dodge when he has tusks. You kind of want to time it like that while he's on an upswing. Okay, this is a very good position to get some ammo drums off. Just one more. And again, because I'm using blue weapons, this fight takes quite a bit longer than it would with higher level gear. You probably do it in at least half the time if you're doing it with, you know, like a Death Seeker. So I'm going to freeze him one more time. Again, aiming just for like the plasma cannons, the eyes, if you can hit them just to get a little bit of extra damage. Keeping an eye on those salvo cannons. They're glowing right now, so I'm ready to dodge. And we're just going to try and get this last ammo drum. There we go. So then I'll just finish him off with a brace shot to the belly. As you guys can see, exploding those shock canisters is a pretty neat trick that makes it much easier to harvest the tusks. The real challenge here is getting the dodge timing down for the Tremortusk attacks after you've removed the tusks. Remember to keep your distance to make this easier, and also don't forget to keep alternating between freezing and focusing on those ammo drums. If you do this, the Tremortusk will be down before you know it, and you'll have lots of great loot to pick up. Now, let's talk about the Apex variant. I won't say Apex Tremortusks are easier, but the strategy is simpler because they're actually weak to shock, so we can shock them directly. However, I recommend you hold off on trying to fight Apex Tremortusks until you have a really solid shock weapon like the Lightning Hunter Bow, Thunderbolt Shredder Gauntlet, or Ancestor's Return Shredder Gauntlet. For more info on all those items, I'll link my gear series below, but just know that the most resource efficient way to do this in the endgame is to use shock shredders since you can catch them and prevent the ammo from being used up. Getting the Apex variant shocked is simpler, but they do have much more health than normal Tremortusks, so be prepared for a longer fight after you get the tusks off. Removing the ammo drums won't be enough to finish an Apex off, so you'll need to focus on freezing it and damaging other components like the plasma cannons, salvo cannons, heat sinks, and shock cannons. You can also deal a respectable amount of damage anywhere on its body while it's frozen. The best way to take advantage of this is to use a bolt blaster with a sustained burst weapon technique to melt its health down really fast. It's also fun to land a bunch of drill spikes, which will continue dealing damage over time. In the endgame, I personally prefer to use the Ancestor's Return or Thunderbolt Shredder Gauntlet to deal damage, again because shredder ammo is very resource efficient. Alright guys, that's my master machine hunting guide for Tremortusks. I think Tremortusks are definitely one of the cooler new machines, but they can also be very challenging, especially when you want those tusks, so I hope this video helped you out. Keep in mind that the tusks are worth 89 shards each, and with 4 of them from each kill plus other valuable resources, hunting Tremortusks is actually a pretty good endgame strategy for farming shards. If you guys enjoyed this video or learned something new, leaving a like really does help small channels like mine. As always, thank you guys for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.